All right, we're recording. Cool. All right, 3, 2. You're listening to Batman on Film, chapter by chapter, Batman 89. We're doing a little bit of a chapter break here. We're still talking about Batman 89, but we're not going to get into the film. But I have a very special guest joining me today. I have Mr. FJ DeSanto. You may have heard him on the show before. FJ, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was excited to invite you on here. Just because I feel like a lot of us, I think if we're at a certain age, we were kind of experiencing Batman 89, when it came out and we got to experience all that. So I wanted to kind of just have a fun little conversation about what was it like for you back then? What was your experience? What were you doing? And really just anything else that kind of pops up. So first
Well,
off,
I was lucky. I'm of a certain age where, the certain milestones of comics and comic book movies sort of hit at the right moment. So, being a teenager of a certain age when Dark Knight Returns comes out or Watchmen, and sort of being not a little kid anymore and sort of comics were sort of growing alongside. So the movie is, in my opinion, the sort of natural payoff for that era in the 80s. Like to me, I feel like the entire world of comic books culminates with this movie, over the 80s. You start where we're like, stuff like Teen Titans in the early 80s, which were sort of and X-Men and stuff like that, where there were sort of mature takes on these heroes. Subsequently, then you go into, like the Superman reboots and stuff like that, and Crisis and all that stuff. It was a real era of sort of taking risks and doing different things with it. And subsequently, Frank Miller in particular laid a specific groundwork for the comic audience, for us, that by the time that movie comes out, while it's not a direct adaptation of anything Frank did, they set a sort of tone that we hadn't seen before, in that you could do this dark, mysterious version of Batman. And I think it just reached a fever pitch. And I was, in my mid-teens when it came out. So I was old enough to drive, like Friends. It was an event when it came out.
Yeah.
And it was a real fever pitch. And, I was thinking about this when I was watching the movie last night. Like, they debuted the costume in a New York Times article, like in a black and white costume. And I remember it's just a bad angle, like of the suit. And, they changed the logo and all that stuff, the bat insignia and all that stuff. But I was still pumped for it. Like there was still something very exciting about it. And it was what people don't realize now. And I think, with the Flash coming out, and I think it's invoking a lot of nostalgia for that era. There was a real cultural moment, in not just comic book movies, but in movies in general. It was a lot of fun. It was something that, at that time we didn't have Star Wars for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones was coming out that year. So there had been a gap. There wasn't sort of anything like that other than Superman, which was at that point 10 years.
Yeah.
Before that, especially with the merchandising, it was so much crazy stuff then. And I ate all that up. I ate all of it up. I loved it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because, I'm probably, I think I'm about 4 to 6 years away from where you're at. So I was a little younger, so I don't remember a lot of the controversies and stuff coming out, but I do remember seeing like, oh shoot, it's Batman. And, my only experience with Batman was superpowers and, like Super Friends, all that stuff. And then the Adam West show. And, you nailed it with the influence of, like, again, it's not like it was based on Year One or Dark Knight Returns, but there definitely was a tone influence, because even the comics back then, it was a little more straightforward. Batman, he was creature of the night, but I even feel like that some of that early 80s stuff, it strayed a little bit away from like the Denny O'Neil, like Neil Adams era.
It's an interesting path, because in the 70s, which is the late 70s, is my very early comic reading. I'm talking like 4 years old, like first reading comics. And I was a little late for the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil stuff, but they reprinted them in the giant oversized books and shit like that. But for me, the touchstone, which I think this movie actually draws more from than, say, the Frank Miller Year One Dark Knight Returns stuff, is actually the Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers stuff.
Yeah.
Which is my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
Batman.
Strange Apparitions.
Strange Apparitions. love that, and I was buying that when it was coming out, because basically Vicky Vale in this movie is Silver St. Cloud, just different guys, and that was a very contemporary take on Batman at the time, where other stuff didn't. But to your point, after that, in sort of the 80s, the sort of pre-Dark Knight Batman sort of skews all over the place a little bit, and doesn't really have the definition that it eventually sort of gets, where Dark Knight sort of retroactively sort of alters the comic line in a good way. And and it's just, again, when you look back at it, it's just these milestones just hit, and it builds to this crescendo that pays off with the movie.
So let's go back to where you were. You said you were just about to drive around. You were experiencing the cultural phenomenon. That's what I remember the most, was when Batman 89 came out. It was everywhere. Even though I didn't get to see it, and people have heard this, I didn't get to see it in the theater, I still experienced Batman 89. I feel like you couldn't get away from it. Everywhere, like towels, figures, all the basic merchandise, Taco Bell stuff. I still have cups from Taco Bell, just because there's something about that film. I feel like it was, out of all the Batman films that have come out, and they merchandise everything, I feel like it's the most collectible. There's something about it. Even last week, I or a couple weeks ago, I bought a grapple gun. They're still
the aesthetic of the movie is insane, and it's never been replicated. That was the one big thing. Anton Furst in particular is just, it's like a talent unleashed. And when you look at that movie and you put it in the context of the time, nothing looked like that. Nothing. Even the costume, now we're so used to Batman in that costume and that kind of reality, non-tights, sort of thing. But at the time, it was very stark and very bold in the choices. The production design of the movie, and the even when you have the design of that grappling gun, we had never seen any of that stuff before in a superhero movie. It was always Superman flying around. That was really it at that point. And it was a legit cultural phenomenon. I mean, I remember, the opening night, it was an event. You were waiting outside, you were waiting online, and people were crazy in the theater cheering, etc. It was so fun. I remember I went with a group of friends, and it was the first time you have girlfriends and things like that. And, that right age of just it's dark enough and it wasn't corny. And it had humor in it, but it was good, humor that sort of worked within the context of the movie. And Batman was cool, and Prince was doing the music, and it was cool. And you walk into Times Square, Manhattan, and there's a giant bat logo. And that was the beauty. The marketing was just so brilliant. It was just, we're just going to market the logo. And
that poster was everywhere. I remember being at the beach that summer, and I just remember it being in the window of I think it was a Warehouse Records, old Warehouse Records store, just because it was the Prince album. It was just Prince, Batman, just that logo. And it was really interesting how they cut off the sides of it just a little bit to kind of go, what the heck is that? You knew it was Batman, but if you weren't familiar with that world, you're like, what the heck is this? Gold. It almost looked like a mouth, if you just kind of glanced at it. But I just remember it being all over the place. And I remember people getting their head shaved, the bat logo in the head. Remember that? It probably was wild, man.
Probably Bill did that.
Yeah, Bill Raby did that. I was talking to a couple guys almost maybe a year ago, and one of the guys, he's like, it wasn't as big as you guys think it was. I'm like, I can't. I don't even think the Dark Knight marketing match. The Dark Knight marketing was really cool. They had all viral stuff going on, but it didn't. I don't think it hit 89, and I don't think anything else has hit again.
As much as I love the Nolan movies, they're important movies, and I think Dark Knight is, in my opinion, the best comic book based movie maybe ever made, or at least in the top 3. They weren't cultural events, like this 89 movie, and you couldn't do it 5 years before, you couldn't do it 5 years after. It was just the zeitgeist at that point, where whoever's telling you it wasn't that big is nuts, because it was a legit event. And it's a merchandising masterclass, it's a marketing masterclass, And even like with the Prince thing, no one had done anything like that
Yeah.
before.
Didn't he write it in like
Everybody does
less than
that.
a month or something like that? What didn't he
Sorry?
like? Didn't he create? I thought I read that he created that like record like real fast and
Oh,
like
he did it like that.
yeah.
He did it with dailies. Like that's why some of the sound bites sound different than what's in the movie. They
Oh,
were
okay,
giving him the dailies to sort of sample off of.
gotcha.
Which, was, I mean, it's truly innovative.
Yeah,
And when you put it in context of 1989, it's nuts that they were able to do that. And it's as dark visually as it is, it's a surprisingly fun movie.
yeah.
That's the one thing I sort of realized. I took it so seriously, but I mean, look, like you, my introduction to Batman was the '66 Batman show and
Mhm.
reruns. And I remember being 3, 4 years old, scared of Caesar Romero. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and then you get to a certain age where you go, oh, this is corny, and you sort of dismiss it for a little bit, and then you go back to it in like a nostalgia way and you really appreciate it. I never had that experience with the '89 movie, meaning like it always stayed in my head relevant, and it always stayed cool. And even rewatching it last night, like it holds up. It holds
yeah,
up better than the subsequent movies. And I think because the first movie is a Batman movie, the second movie is a Tim Burton movie with Batman
yeah,
in it. And so the Burton aesthetic overtakes it, whereas the first movie has the right balance of Anton first, just visually off the charts. It looks like another planet.
yeah,
And then the second part of it is the Burton aesthetic sort of creeps in there in different places. Like the balloons are very Burton,
yeah,
some of the gothicness of it. And you could tell Burton wasn't fully flexing his Burton muscles, which isn't a
yeah,
bad thing.
yeah. He's
But
definitely reined in. This was like a
the second movie, he's not.
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why he doesn't come back for the third movie, because Warner's was not happy with that.
So take a break, do something small. Yeah. With like the Anton first designs and everything, like what is one of your favorite like pieces? Like I love the car. I feel like if you look at the car, it says Batmobile, even if you didn't know it was a Batmobile. Like I just like how it speaks for itself. Is there anything about uh just the elements of the film that you're like, man, this is my absolute favorite piece? Like
I don't know. I used to love going. There was a certain floor at DC Comics when they were in New York, and you'd go and they'd have like each floor in DC Comics was a different city from DC Comics. So the main floor was Metropolis, like you walked into a mural of the Daily Planet, and then there was like sort of an editorial floor where it was Gotham City, and they had, and in the waiting area they would have the framed Anton First concept art.
oh, cool.
And it was just like I would just constantly. I wish in those days I had the cell phone with the camera to take pictures of it, because it was just crazy stuff, and it was the original stuff too.
Oh, nice.
And I think for me, as much as I like the car, the Batwing
Yeah.
was like, I remember when that came on screen, I was just like, holy shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah,
is
because
the
it kind of
coolest
sweeps
thing.
in there. You get
Yeah,
that
like the
real
way it's
feeling.
introduced is just really cool. But to be honest, I mean, I just think the visual design of Gotham
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
I'm actually shocked no one's tried to replicate it. You know what I mean? Like the closest actually it reminds me of is the Matt Reeves movie. Like the Gotham
Yeah.
is very similar, but you can still tell they're shooting, at least in the Reeves movie, in real cities, whereas this
Yeah.
is just completely designed and in the same place where they did Blade Runner in England. And but
That's
I can't
Pinewood
pick,
Studio, right?
I'm sorry.
Is that Pinewood?
Yeah,
Pinewood
yeah.
Studios? Yeah.
And I can't pick one thing. It's just, I think for me, it's the visual aesthetic of Gotham as a whole.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, if I had to pick like one thing, is the Batwing is just like, I just remember just being like, in those days we didn't have the internet, so we weren't spoiled by a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? Like you'd see something like in an article or something like that, or
Starlog.
Yeah, Starlog.
Yeah.
But then when the Batwing came out, I was just blown away by that. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the city too. I think out of all the films, and again, they're all different. They all have a reason why they look the way they look, but it still is the one that, again, it's Gotham is a character in that film. It just is. It feels like this place smells like rainwater and metal. That's kind of like when I watch it, I that's what I feel. And yeah, they nailed it. And I think there was a comic book where they tried to introduce that look. I remember they even had Anton First sketches on the cover.
Oh
And
yeah, I forgot what that is though.
it was called Destroyer. There was a guy who was like some guy who was like blowing up old architecture in Gotham. That's all I remember. And then it's when they introduced kind of a new Gotham City like precinct that it looked like it was a Anton First design. And I just remember it was like a 3-part story or something. But yeah, I love that. I love the architecture. That's
My
kinda,
old boss, Michael Uslan, who I'm sure has been on this 1,000 times, and how I know Bill for so long, was very tight with Anton. And they told me the story about basically when Anton went to Burton, basically, what do you want? What do you want this to look like? And there were two sort of aesthetics. One was, I might have this wrong. Someone can ask Michael this. Is hell as if it erupted from the ground was one thing. And
that's the number one quote. Like that quote pops up a lot. Yeah.
New York as if there was no zoning and planning.
Yeah.
That was the other sort of, description. It was like a city built above a city. Like there was the old city, and then there was like a newer city built on top of it to make it as claustrophobic as possible. And subsequently, like it's a smart opening to the movie where the family gets mugged and the simple "I'm Batman" thing, like you feel that city right away, the claustrophobia of it, the chaos of it, and that's something no one's tried to replicate. And I understand that the Nolan movies are more grounded and more what if Batman existed in our world. This is still like a real fantasy in a weird way. Like maybe the only time is like the Joker where I felt that sort of chaos in the city, especially like the third act of the Joker.
Oh, you have the parade and everything.
Yeah. But it's great.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the cast. Jack Nicholson as the Joker. We were talking about this a couple episodes ago. I wanted to get your take. I really don't feel like it's. I feel like it's a easy target to say, oh, he's just being Jack Nicholson, and I don't really feel like that. I feel like if you say that, you haven't seen a lot of Jack Nicholson films. His take is still one of my favorites because I think he delivers such a it's a wild performance. It's like he's having a good time, you can tell, but you can see like the insanity kind of dripping out in certain lines. He has these little bloop bloop. He does these little ad libs of like just like these just little wacky like ends to anytime he says something. And to me, I was like, oh, that's so he's having a good time, but he's putting these little smart touches on. Like I feel like the Joker's brain coming apart. That's how I took it. It's like, oh, he's totally like he'll say something and he'll just like lose it, and he has these little like drips as he says stuff. But I think that it's a weak criticism to say he's just being Jack. It's obviously it is him. It's like a great pick. Like, man, get Jack Nicholson to be the Joker. Like I don't know who else you could have got.
You couldn't have. And again, that's part of what we were talking about with the zeitgeist, and it was just. I totally agree with everything you just said, and I think. What is, again, having rewatched it last night, is you forget they set up Jack before he's a Joker as a psychopath. He's the lapdog to Carl Grissom, right?
Yeah.
And you have that bit where Eckhart's like, I don't deal with psychopaths. He's nuts. He murdered the parents, and he would have killed the kid if the other guy didn't call him, right? And what you don't realize, because it's not a gory movie, he kills a lot of people in this movie. Like that was the big thing I realized. Like he's murdering everybody in this movie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like it's mass genocide of that city.
Yeah,
he's going for, right. So he's absolutely nuts. But to your point about the little nuances, every time he ventures into Jack Nicholson territory, he finds something that lures it back to being the Joker and being this homicidal maniac.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that bit where like he can do that whole goofy dance in the art museum. But then you're absolutely scared shitless of him when he sits down with her, right? Like that balance is really, really good. And it look, those Joker qualities, you want Jack Nicholson for it because he's that kind of actor. Yeah. But for him to do that performance in all that makeup and the prosthetics on the face is nuts.
Yeah,
like he's a giant to be able to pull that off, and it's not goofy, and he stays scary. And he has some funny bits in it. But what I liked, sort of one thing I had forgotten at the end was at the top of the bell tower and all his goons are up there because he's not going to fight Batman. Like Batman's going to kick his ass, right? So like he's smart in it. And I also forgot, like he gets Bruce gets the file, and it's like he studied chemistry. Like he's sort of like an evil genius without really twirling the mustache and saying I'm an evil genius.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I took these classes in college, and I get a kind of a rough idea of like how this stuff is going to mix together, like, that's
it's a really clever villain plot when you think about it. Like, and that was the other thing I was sort of, when I was rewatching it, was sort of like, oh yeah, it's not just going to poison everybody. It's the combination of these items will kill you. Yeah. Right. And it's like, well, that's brilliant. That's really, really cool. And it was a big surprise. It's very easy. I shouldn't say it's a big surprise. It's very easy to just look at it as one-dimensional Jack Nicholson performance when it's clearly super nuanced. Like when he goes to the you were telling me before you just covered the scene with the other mob bosses. Yeah. And he puts on the human makeup for that. Like the vanity of it is really interesting. And why he would do that, and or he shows up at the museum to impress her, or she pours the water on him and all that stuff. Like there are layers to that character, as opposed, like I was sort of drawing the parallel between that scene you're talking about with the mob bosses and the Heath Ledger one, where they're different sort of shows of strength to the mob. Yeah. In those respective movies, and they both work. Like when Heath does the pencil trick when he puts the guy's head, which is absolutely nuts. Yeah. In this, it's the buzzer that fries the dude, which could be really corny, but it isn't. Yeah. Like it's a super fine line he walks in that and succeeds.
Yeah. I think the one of the things I find interesting is, and you're talking about he's a mass murderer, right? But as the audience, we're like cheering everything he does. We're laughing at everything he does. And we talked a little bit about, like, isn't it crazy? Like he's taking Grissom out. But he's laughing. He's shooting over his shoulder, under his leg, and all this stuff. And we're like, dude, he shot this guy like 9 times, and we're laughing as the audience. Like that's the Joker winning.
We're never once forgetting, even though he's killing everybody and laughing, that he's a murderer. That he's an actual threat. Yeah. He's, in my opinion, he's just as smart as Batman, except his brain is falling apart throughout like you point out. His brain is all over the place.
Yeah. I wanted to, one of the things that I've been noticing is the prosthetics. Like it looks like it inhibits him a little bit, but he uses it. There's the scene where he drinks the martini. Oh yeah. It just feels really weird. He drinks it such a weird, like it's such a weird drink, but it seems like the Joker's just being kind of silly and just drinking it kind of like weird, but it's probably because
it's because of the prosthetics.
The prosthetics, but it works though. It's
because he can't sip, so he can't sit there and go like this, like it'll mess up the prosthetics won't allow that.
Yeah, I love that whole thing. It's one of the things that's funny is like my kids, they've grown up on this film, and so like when they're a little bit younger, my younger boy, he's like, hey dad, I can't brush my teeth because I just went in the shower. And like he's all, if you put those together, and I was like, what are you saying? He's all, dad, it'll poison me like the Joker, because the concoction of health products. So that's funny. I love all that stuff. This movie is so quotable too, but not in an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of way. I just think every scene there's been like these like Jack has the best lines in this whole film. I know there was
but Batman has the two that are more in the sort of zeitgeist, and you see in the Flash trailer that I'm Batman. Oh yeah, I want to get nuts, which they're doing in the Flash.
Okay, so they didn't say that in the trailer, but I heard it was in something else. Like I heard it was in like a CinemaCon trailer or something.
Do I want to get nuts? Yeah. That's in the movie.
Yeah, you would know how to.
I got lucky. I read an early version of it before Affleck, so it's probably a lot different now. But everybody I know who sees it loves it. So yeah, I'm excited for it. And he looks great in the costume. The costume redesign is cool. And
it looks good. We can just get into it. It's fine. This is a loose conversation, but I love the Super Bowl ad. It had like a whole bunch of other suits. That was cool. I was like, oh, I want to see more.
Well, and one of them is the goggles that are very reminiscent of the Affleck. Nightmare
Yeah.
Batman, the far right costume.
Yeah, it looked like I read an article with the guy who designed it, and he was kind of like,
Well, he was tweeting about it. That guy. He was
yeah,
really
because I was like,
excited.
oh, does he have guns? But he said they're actual grapple guns. They're not like pistols, but he had grapple guns on holsters. Like, oh, that's cool. Like, you know,
Right.
I don't want to, you know, I get like there's reason where Batman had a gun, but I just, you know, I don't feel like Batman be blowing guys away.
But that's what I like. It's fun. You can speculate what happened in the 30 years since we've seen him or whatever. And
Yeah.
all these different adventures he's gone on.
Yeah, I love that. I just love that. There's like a perceived history of what he did. Hopefully, if it's, I mean, I'm sure this movie will be bananas, but it'd be really nice to see like, hey, maybe they can tell a story of like that Keaton Batman. I didn't like the Batman '89 comic book they put out.
I thought it started off okay and then sort of tapered off. Like it was too long and it was too obvious. It
didn't hit for me. I didn't feel like it was the right story for that world. It felt more of it felt like I thought it was a good story, but it wasn't a Burton Batman universe story. It felt too real, the themes. And I was like, oh, I get what they're doing, but it didn't work for me as it wasn't weird enough. I thought this Batman has a really weird world, and this didn't feel like that.
So yeah, they should have gotten Jerry Ordway to draw it. But
well, I don't think he wanted to.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, that's also, by the way, to go back to the '89 movie, I think the comic adaptation is on the level of one of the top comic adaptations of a movie.
Oh yeah,
like Ordway's just insane. It's like Al Williamson with the Star Wars stuff, where it's just like, again, in those days, you know, you'd have to wait how many years to get it on VHS or whatever. Yeah. That was your only way to remember these stories and things like that, were those comics or novels and things like that.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Ordway's work on that is just insane.
It's really good. Like even the coloring on it, I thought it looked special. I remember that was I remember the first time I went to a comic book store, I found that because like my favorite version of Batman was mostly from the film. Like, okay, I know Batman. This is who I know. So I was looking for that, and I loved that book. I just loved how, you know, he illustrated that whole thing, you know, through likenesses, and it's what made me seek out his work. That's how I started reading some Superman books. I was like, oh, I know that name Ordway, and so I was.
He's still got it. Like he does a lot of commissions and stuff like that. During COVID, he was doing these sort of like, I don't know, they were charity things, and he did an Earth 2 Robin sketch cover, like that he colored. I bid up to, I think, $1,000 on it, and I still lost.
Oh man!
At a certain point, I hit the wall. I can't go further than this.
Yeah, he's incredible.
He's still really, really good. Really, really good.
All right, I wanted to get back to the Bat costume. We were talking a little bit about it. I still think it's one of the best, you know, Batman suits that have been on film. I get like the restricting, like it was a little bit restrictive, but just in the design and the style of it, I think it's sweet. I think it's not too.
It's awesome. It's better than the Returns one. It's better than the subsequent ones in that initial 4 movies.
Yeah, the other one's got a little too like over designed, you know.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the Returns one is that it's too armory, right? Like it's like too, I don't want to say boxy, but like sort of just like it's almost too metallic and not organic looking like this one, right? Yeah. And it's sort of weird now. It's really funny because I was reading somebody, I don't know, maybe it was on Twitter, someone was complaining after the Flash trailer, like they didn't fix the neck issues, you know, with the costume. And, you know, that they sort of figured out when they did the Nolan movies and all that stuff. And when you watch, it's actually a part of his acting aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like especially when he's going up the clock tower and he's got to look up like that. And, you know, like he can't tilt his head. Like it's almost, it adds to the Batman mystique in a way. It's like, you don't want them to figure that out. You don't want, you want Keaton to continue to do those almost stiff like movements, but it works for the character.
Oh yeah, I love it.
It's the first costume's amazing.
Yeah,
and that's why I like the Flash costume, because it's basically like a middle ground between the '89 and the Returns costume. It's like this. It's a really smart balance of costume. But I think this one in particular, the '89 one, is iconic.
Yeah.
In that it seems practical, but it retains that superhero feel to it. Like I believe him as Batman in that costume. And they have good bits, like when he gets knocked out in the alley, and they're sort of like, "What is the suit? He's human." And
check his wallet.
yeah, like, but it's sort of the explanation of the costume is very subtle, and it works in that way. I think the design of it is incredible, and I'm actually always surprised that DC in the comics didn't utilize that version more because it was so iconic.
Yeah, they never really went full black. I think I'm gonna get it mixed up. I think they tried after Batman's back was broken. They gave him I thought they gave him an all black suit just for a minute. He had these little leg prongs too. It was weird. It was a story called Troika. And then anyways, then every few episodes or issues, they would just kind of scale it back to what we got was just the no trunks, yellow oval. It was like that till No Man's Land. But yeah, for me as a kid, man, I was everything I wanted that summer. I wanted a black Batman shirt, but all the marketing was just kind of Jose Luis Garcia Lopez type of stuff, like classic stuff. It was great because it was everywhere. You know, they could even throw Robin on stuff, even though he was not in the film. But I really wanted that black Batman. You couldn't find it anywhere. So I was a little younger. I was trying to get the toys. I had to get rain checks. You'd go to like Target, and I remember I wanted to get a Batmobile and a Batman, and like they're like, you get a rain. I didn't know what that meant. My mom's like, it means you'll get it later. And so it was months before I could even get anything. You know,
that was the advantage of living in New York is we were able to get all that. And I was old then. You know, I was a teenager, and I was still buying them. You know,
what was your favorite thing that you were able to purchase back then?
The Batwing.
Really? Okay.
Him and the Batwing was great. I'm like, I didn't buy all the multi-costume things and all that.
Yeah.
Shit. Like it was just like the movie version. Like here's Batman, here's Joker, here's Bob the Goon. You know, and I know I had the car and the wing. There was a cave, right?
There was a cave, yeah.
Yeah, I think I had the cave.
Yeah, I still have my car somewhere. It's in the.
It's all in my dad's house. I never threw anything out, so it's all.
Yeah.
I was big into superpowers. Like I loved superpowers. So, the figures weren't as good as the superpowers ones. No.
When there was the company that did them, Toy Biz. I don't know how they got the license. I don't know. That's a whole wild story.
You know, that's Avi Arad, right?
Oh, is that who that was?
Yeah. So Avi Arad was Toy Biz.
Oh, I didn't know.
And
that makes sense.
And then there was like. They went through some shenanigans to buy it out from him so Kenner could do the toys for the movie.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, later it eventually morphs into Kenner.
Yeah.
There was like a weird legal thing with that. I forget. Uslan would know all that stuff.
Yeah. Those figures the Kenner figures were just the superpowers Batman. They just modded. The head was different, but it's the same body. But it was like, I love those. I still have some of them. Like they're just.
Oh, I got all that shit. I love that stuff. I've got like, I think I have almost all the superpowers for you, like including like the rare Cyborg one and all that stuff. Like,
I wish I have.
But I was never a guy like like I'm of the generation like at least I didn't know like keep him in the box kind of stuff.
Well, why would you though?
I played with all that shit.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like
you're squeezing the legs.
Yeah, the comics. I didn't put them in board bags. I read them till they fell apart. You know what I mean? Like. I'm like, I didn't care about that. Now I do. Now it's because the packaging's nicer and stuff like that. And
it depends. Like there's sometimes like I just have it because I'm like, what am I gonna? Someone buys it for me. What am I gonna do with it? Unless my kid wants to play with it, and I have no problem giving it to him. But it's just it makes that stuff. That's what I think about this movie. It makes me happy. That type of stuff. I see Batman '89. I'm like, man, that just it reminds me of that time. And I like all the other Batman films. But this one, if I'm gonna purchase a grapple gun, I'm gonna get the '89 one because it's just there's something about it. Don't tell my wife.
Sure. The problem is if I bought one of them, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'd be shooting around the house, and my wife would kill me.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's what this thing does. I want to shoot it at her.
Yeah, and that becomes a dilemma. The problem is I have so much crap that like to buy more now at this point is irrelevant. It's just gonna collect dust somewhere. Because I see all these new like Sideshow and Prime One doing these beautiful Michael Keaton statues and things like that, and I'm just like, yeah, I'll throw $1,000 on that, and then I'm like, where the hell am I gonna put that?
I know.
Like
you have to have a special room.
If I didn't put up all the Transformers I did for my show, I ain't gonna put up Batman.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so like you're a music guy, like
Occasionally.
occasionally. What's your thoughts on the score?
Score's great.
The Danny
I mean,
Elfman
it's
score.
iconic. It's a great theme. I remember buying the Prince soundtrack and being disappointed the score wasn't on it. Like I didn't know. Then they released the score with the cool image of the moon with the Batwing in it.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. It's iconic. Like when you hear that theme, you know it's what it is.
Yeah.
And there's a manic there's a manic feel to a lot of the Joker stuff, which is great. There's a lot of like cool like erratic strings and things like that really it's a movie where that music really sets the tone. Like even like I didn't remember this till I watched it yesterday, is like even in the opening scene you hear the Prince music in the background. I didn't remember that. You know what I mean? Like it's all everything is expertly placed throughout the movie in terms of the tone. Because I always remember the Prince stuff being in the museum and all that stuff, but
it's very subtle in the streets, like you hear on someone's boombox or something.
Yeah, like that. I didn't realize that, and you know, the score is excellent. Like it's just, I think it's probably his best score. But
yeah, it's really amazing how Danny Elfman was able to even be a part of this, because there's a story where they're talking about like, oh gosh, what's the name of the producer again of Batman?
John Peters.
John Peters. Yeah, like Burton's all just play the hero theme, and he heard it. He's like, okay, that's it, because he was so like, who's this like Oingo Boingo guy? Like like what is this? And that I think that score, it's still like so iconic when you hear it. They even used it for the Schumacher films. They didn't even use the Goldenthal stuff. They used the kind of the ending reprise for those trailers. I remember that because it just said Batman in. And it's hard to go up. I mean, everyone else who's made a theme they're fine and they work. It's still, this thing is just still rooted in like who Batman is. Even like,
look, to be honest, I don't remember the music in the Nolan movies like I do that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I got it and I appreciate it, but again, it's magic. It's like the Star Wars theme and the Superman theme. I think those.
Oh, it's up there. It's totally up there.
Yeah, it really.
I don't remember X-Men theme. I don't remember Iron Man theme. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, I remember the X-Men animated theme. I think that one. If you're gonna go animated shows, that thing's like, I get it. But yeah, those movies, even Elfman's Spider-Man theme, I can't. It'll take me a little bit to find it.
Right.
It's hard. I mean, that's scores is a game. And I can't think of a current score. I'm like, oh, I get that one. I think. Actually, I really like the Guardians theme that Tyler Bates did. I think that one to me, it feels fun. It reminds me of Star Wars, space type of stuff. I really think they did a good job with that. But
right.
All right. I wanted to get a couple more things out of you, FJ, and I'll let you go. Do you have a favorite part of this film? Is there a part that you're like, oh man, I'll put that on and watch it and love it?
I like the mid-movie chase with her, the car and the shields, and he fights them in the alley. It's just cool seeing Batman do hand-to-hand stuff.
Yeah.
My only complaint about those first two movies is there's not enough Batman in it and doing cool shit. But when he does, it's great. So that mid-movie chase when he rescues her at the museum onward in that, he's great. I like that more than the ending. Just for fun action, like you'd never seen anything with like the car before like that. With shields and all that stuff and stop and but him just fighting those guys in the alley is just a lot of fun. I'm also a huge fan of just the opening, the up till the I'm Batman. Like I just think that's iconic. Introduction of a character. The way they do some great stuff in it, like the way he floats in and out of scenes, like the Ace Chemicals in the beginning, the way he comes in and out, and stuff like that. And I always liked that they showed the wire and disconnected from the grapple gun, so there was a practical element to it, as opposed to suspend your imagination kind of thing. So I thought that always worked really, really well. But when he sort of floats into that opening scene, when you first see him,
drops down.
Yeah, and I love the overhead shot when he's looking down, it's clearly like CG drawn.
Yeah.
He turns around and goes back into the building and all this. But it was like I remember seeing that and going, this is Batman. Like this is the cool shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that opening scene. I love when he's in the chemical plant. Like it's just because he's like such a ghost. Like
Yeah.
the way he kind of and his cape work is so cool. How he kind of goes through like all the chemical gas and smoke and stuff like that. It's the right balance of like mystery and superhero stuff. Like
Yeah.
and again, it could be again like that's the first cinematic version I've seen of Batman. I just think they nailed it so much, and not that people have to completely copy all that, but I'm like, that's where you have to learn. Like when Batman's walking around and you just kind of see him in his suit, it kind of makes me laugh. I always feel like he should be kind of shrouded. And there's some films where I'm like, oh man, I don't feel like Batman would just be hanging out like that. But it has informed me like of how Batman should look in all things. And I love how Burton lights them. There's the scene in when they're in the cave right after the scene you're talking about where he rescues her and they has the great
on his eyes and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, it's like the Bela Lugosi shot. You know what I'm saying? Like where it's
Wow.
just his eyes kind of he throws her the files, and the way he's lit, he's all dark and you only see his eyes, and they're kind of on two sides of the screen. I love that shot. I'm like, dude, that's one of my favorite shots in the whole film. And like and I'm a weird art nerd, but like for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know that took work, like with just getting everybody, lights set up the right way and blocking and stuff. And I'm like, oh, I really appreciate what he did there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was an intentional,
but it is intentional. It's clearly you can't light it and not make that intentional. But what that does is explains his psychosis. It explains, because she's basically saying, like, some say you're crazy or you're a madman too. And the look in his, he is. I mean, that's the beauty of the Burton Batman is he's nuts.
Yeah.
Like it's not a joke. Like this is a guy who's and what I like about the movie is you slowly uncover the origin, the parents and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like she sort of follows him around and takes the picture and does the homework with Knox and all that stuff. She's slowly unpeeling the layers of his trauma in a really cool way. And, as much as I love Michelle Pfeiffer in the second movie, there was an interesting love triangle I thought you could have had. But there's too many characters in the second movie anyway. Yeah. But like to see what happened with that relationship is, because there's a great line in the second movie. You're like, you're the one who let Vicky Vale in the cave. You know what I mean? Which is a great line.
That was all we got. That was the only connection, really.
Yeah, but there was a beauty to go back to the Englehart Rogers stuff where, and this was what was great at the time. How they did that is Silver St. Cloud figured it out that he was Batman just based on his jaw, right? Like she's sleeping with him. She's that close. She's gonna know. When she's Batman. She knows, the mouth and the jaws.
Yeah, they were at that party, right, where they were jumping on the typewriters. That's where she.
Yeah, and
it's Bruce.
Where she sees him, above on the typewriter thing. But what was great about that was she was super smart like that. But then also, it was a good reason for her to leave him, to not sort of stay with him. She couldn't handle it. Like that's how in my mind, that's what happened with Vicky Vale, because Vicky Vale's a reported version of Silver St. Cloud.
Yeah. Did it bug you that it was the Joker who killed his parents?
No, it didn't bother me. I'm not one of those guys who, if they change canon and it works.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure Uslin's told this story in one of his books, but he told me that when they told Bob Kane it was the Joker who killed his parents, he was like, I wish I thought of that. So it didn't bother me because I thought it tied up the movie really well. I thought
it definitely was like an 80s, plot, like storytelling. Like I get it. I get why they did it.
Personal stakes. It gave Batman something different, and
it had that great exchange. The whole "I made you, you made me." Like that was a nice back and forth between them.
And by the way, when they did that, I knew. I remember distinctly watching the movie, and when they revealed Joker killed his parents, which I thought, oh, that's a cool twist. Yeah. But I was like, they're killing the Joker.
Yeah.
because there's no way you pay that off and then he's still around.
Yeah. Which
Which
is
I think retroactively they probably regretted killing the character, but it's a cool death.
yeah, but you couldn't like with that laughing bag, I mean
The
it
problem with Joker in the
it's just
movies, even the Heath
great.
stuff, is like you don't buy that you're just going to be able to arrest this guy,
Yeah.
especially the Heath Ledger version. You know,
Yeah.
like it was like we already saw him break out of prison
Yeah.
in this movie, you know, and then you capture him, he's hanging by his ankle at the end. Like, you know, what are you gonna do with him? Where do you
Yeah.
lock him up? But Nolan had a plan that got derailed, unfortunately, with that. But
Yeah.
the you know you lose in the '89 Batman the iconic character that you could bring back. I mean, I think that's where the other movies struggle is an opponent worthy of Batman, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I didn't know, like, this was my first you know, understanding of like Batman's origin. I didn't know any of that going into it. I was 10. They didn't get into it on the show. It was, I think, one episode of Super Friends they did, but I couldn't recall. And so
Right.
this was me learning, and it just, I always loved Batman as a character, but like the movie, kind of cemented like my, oh man, my fandom, like, oh man, I love him. And so I didn't know until my uncle's all, yeah, it was a guy named Joe Chill. Because my uncle's a comic guy and he was like, that's
Yeah.
who killed his parents. And I was like, oh wow, well, okay, like that's cool. I didn't know. I thought his name was Jack Napier. Like, so everything I took that as gospel. Like, oh, this is just
Again, another thing I'm surprised they didn't end up incorporating to the comics. I guess they
yeah.
couldn't, but
They did on the show, on the animated. Like, he was Jack Napier on I think Mask of the Phantasm. But other than
Oh,
that,
really? I don't remember.
yeah, he was in that. I was like, okay, so they used it there, and so I think they called him Jack. Didn't they call him Jack in the Killing Joke? They never gave him a last name, but I thought they called him Jack. I could
I
be
think
off.
one of his guys is he's Jack or something like that. I forget.
Yeah, but yeah, it regardless, like, it just for me, it doesn't bug me. There's probably a phase when I was a little more like legalistic in my nerdum, and like I think late 20s is like should have been Joe Chill, what? But like for the story, it doesn't make sense. Joe Chill makes no sense in the story.
It didn't bother me. It didn't bother me. And they, by the way, they do Joe Chill well in the Nolan movies. You know what I mean? Like in the comics now, I don't know who's killed his parents. Like,
I think it's Joe
solved,
Chill.
it's unsolved. I mean, when I was a kid, there was always the version where he found him in the 50s.
Yeah.
And he lifted his mask. I'm the son of Thomas and Martha Wayne.
The Three Jokers story. I don't know if you read that. I actually was like, oh man, I really like. It was kind of moving how they ended that story. I was like, with Batman, basically like forgiving the guy. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's a whole other like angle of the Batman mythos. But yeah, didn't bug. I was just curious, like, because you were reading the books back then, so you were a little more aware of like, what the heck was going on. So well, good on you for not being the stereotype.
No, I wasn't. If I can't think of anything like, well, Green Lantern's like an example. It's like, well, you change this and it doesn't work. But I can't think of, I'm not a Marvel guy, so when I see the Marvel movies, like half the time I have to ask somebody, like, was that in the comics? All that stuff. My Marvel history is sort of one long period in the 80s of Byrne and Claremont X-Men and George Perez on Avengers, and sort of that's it. And then the Ultimate line, that's really it. So I'll constantly have my wife with these shows go, was that in the comics? I have no clue. I have no idea. Whereas even with the Batman stuff, I'm not as, there's so much of it now, it's hard to keep up with. But but at the time, like, I don't remember, I'm of the belief, and maybe because I was young, that it didn't bother me. It still doesn't bother me if you change something and I guess in my life as a producer, when you're adapting things and stuff like that, you can't be hamstrung. Like, all of a sudden, if you want to make it on Mars in the 1800s, like, wait, well, we have a problem,
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, we came up with this twist that enhances the character. It's like, yeah, hell yeah, do it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. That's the thing. Like, long form comic book storytelling is going to be different than 2-hour movie, and most people are going to watch it and leave. It
did visually different, and so there's no context, right? So your only context for Batman at that point is Adam West, right?
Yeah.
And even at that point, that's 20 years earlier, long before we were around.
Yeah.
So, it was, you were introducing this character to a completely new audience to a degree.
Uh-huh.
Like I remember, again, another Uslan story. He was telling me that Batman had been barely exposed, like in Asia at the time.
Wow.
So like your experience of seeing Batman for the first time that way was, for millions of people. Other than, maybe the Adam West stuff came over and there was some manga and stuff like that in Japan.
Yeah.
But like that's what I talk about it being a cultural thing. Like it was a genuine worldwide phenomenon. And I think because the aesthetics were so different, and I think I'm saying I can only speak for myself on this as a comic fan. At that point, by the time you get to 89, like I was mentioning earlier, you've gone through the 80s where you've gone through these different iterations of Batman. So what's another one, right? Like what, like, when they do Dark Knight Returns, that's really like the first real Elseworlds, right?
Yeah.
Or, the real, like, like they had done like parallel universes and fantasy stuff in the early books, but like this sort of definitive grown up, here's Batman in his 50s or 60s, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you'd gotten to a point where everybody had their Batman, and even now there's so many different versions of Batman. Everybody at every age has their own Batman. So there's a whole generation now where it's like Jack Napier killed the parrot. Like that's your starting point, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole generation of people like you whose Batman is Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just, I went through this, to make the Star Wars comparison. It's like, guys my age hate the prequels, right? And so like, you have the original trilogy,
Yeah.
and then you have the prequels, and then Obi-Wan comes out, and now there's prequel nostalgia because now you have my nephew who's 25, right? And who had the experience of his first Star Wars were the prequels, me taking him to the prequels, right? Or the second and third ones. He was too young for the first one. And so like he doesn't think of Jar Jar Binks any different than he does Jabba the Hutt, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Like whereas our age, it's like they're two very distinctive things. But the Obi-Wan show almost retroactively makes the prequels cool.
Yeah.
Like there's a prequel nostalgia now. And now we're about to hit the point when The Flash comes out. That's going to be the first wave of 89 Batman nostalgia.
Yeah. I'm glad you got there because I know a couple of young guys and they're like, oh yeah, they haven't seen the Keaton movies for ever or if ever, and so I know one of them just recently watched it, like, oh my gosh, I see why people like this, and there's probably a little bit of like, like you're not going to speak ill of like Michael Keaton Batman, like, right? Like it's just he's like he's the guy, he's like the blueprint for like the cinematic Batman. But I am, it already started coming. Like I know this film got delayed, so some stuff, like I got a Michael Keaton Batman Christmas ornament. They had one for the Flash. It already came out. They had Halloween costumes, all this stuff that was supposed to come out. I think the Batgirl film was supposed to come out first, right? Or no, it was supposed to come out in November though, because Flash was supposed to come out in summer. Anyways, so some of this stuff is already kind of leaked out a little bit. But do you have anybody that maybe in your circles that's like, oh shoot, Keaton's coming back? Like that's crazy. Like, what do you think? I've had a couple of people ask me because they're all like, oh, I'm the Batman guy. So like, hey, they asked me, did you know? I'm like,
when I first heard about it, it was probably like a couple of days before it was announced.
Yeah.
And it was like someone, they're gonna bring Keaton back. And I was like, no way.
Yeah.
No. And then like two other people like, Keaton's coming back and they're making a deal for him now and all this stuff. And I was just like, that's brilliant. Because I mean, it's Flashpoint, but instead of Thomas Wayne, you have Michael Keaton, right?
Yeah.
So, which by the way, makes it easier because if you do Thomas Wayne, there's a whole can of worms you have to explain.
Yeah.
Of this Batman with guns who kills people in a parallel universe because the wife presumably was dead, even though she becomes the Joker, which I love in the universe. I love the Flashpoint stuff.
Yeah, Flashpoint's a great story.
And and the son gets killed. Like you'd have to sit there and go through. You don't want Flash dealing with Madman Thomas Wayne and all that stuff. Like it's just too much. So the idea of sort of taking that original conceit of Flashpoint and swapping it for Michael Keaton is, I think, brilliant.
Yeah.
And from the trailer, it seems to have paid off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they lean heavy into that. I think that's what no one was asking me about Flash. They're asking me like, so Michael Keaton's back. What do you think? What's that mean? I'm like, it's just, simple. It's just that same Batman from that era of films. It's just a different universe. And he's, meeting up with them. See what happens. I don't know, but I'm the only sad part of it all is like, oh, I wish that, we'd get more of them. I know the rumor was he was going to kind of be the Batman for a little bit after, whatever. So hopefully if this movie makes $1 billion, they can still pull off an Elseworlds or something like.
That's what multiverses are for.
Yeah. And I know they said that, they're going to try to not have like 3 Batmans running around, but man, it'd be nice to see just another stab at it, because it sounds like all the other stuff is probably off the books. But yeah, man, I think a lot of folks are going to be really stoked to see Michael Keaton back, man. I'm really, that's my number one, like, I want to see the film and all, but like, yeah, I love Keaton. Batman. He's my fave. And I like Affleck. They're both my guys.
Affleck just never got a good movie to be.
He just never got a good movie, and that's the part I'm like, man, I wish he had a good one. But hopefully,
I recently read the Jeff Johns Affleck script, and it needed work. That's all I'm gonna say.
There you go. Don't say anything else.
I can't say anything else.
There you go. They'll quote you.
Exactly.
So, well, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up here. We're about a little under an hour, and I want to let you go. FJ, thanks for hanging out. Is there anything that you want to share with everybody? Let them know other things you're working on. Check out. You're a busy guy.
Busy guy. I'm working with a company called Vault Comics, sort of developing their stuff for film and TV. We just sold something to BET with Ridley Scott's company, which I'm really excited about, called Resonant, which is a great comic.
Oh yeah, Resonant. I read Resonant.
It's a great book. And a couple months ago, my current show Tekken, based on the video game anime I did on that, came out on Netflix. And then there's a secret anime I'm developing now for another streamer, and I'm just plugging away.
Nice. Awesome. Well, FJ, thanks for being on the show. It was fun.
My pleasure. It's good to see you.
Yeah. I don't ever get to talk to FJ. Just to give him.
I'll only talk to you. I won't talk to Bill.
You won't talk to Bill.
He hogs the whole conversation. He starts giving me recipes for chili and shit like that. I don't know.
He's like, what do you think about my chili and my gumbo?
Yeah, exactly. He gave me his gumbo recipe. My wife asked for it, and she didn't make it like right away. And he was like insulted for like a year. Did she make it yet? I said, no, she didn't make it yet. And so
that's funny.
I have to behave.
Yeah, he needs to just put out a recipe book or something, because that's
exactly
like the first 20 minutes of each show is. Yeah, he's retired. He can't do it. It's always like the weather and what are you cooking? So that's exactly. Kind of what goes on here. All right, well, you can find me on Twitter at Justin M. Kowalski. You can follow the show at Batman on Film, and check us out at www.batman-on-film.com. Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, the original. Check us out.